Welcome to Capital Dialogue. I'm Bob Priddy from the Missourinet and Missourinet.com, and we're glad to have you with us on our program. Each month we talk to members of the General Assembly about the things going on in the legislature. We're at spring break now, if you will, a halfway point, the semester break of the legislature, about halfway done. Time to take the temperature and see how we're doing. We only have a few weeks left before adjournment in the middle of May, and a lot of bills are out there, a lot of major issues are still undecided, but they're working. I'd like you to meet the four members of our panel who are going to be discussing things at the halfway point of the legislative session. First on my left is State Representative Sara Lampe. She is from Springfield. And next to her is State Representative Todd Richardson, who is from R-Poplar Bluff. On my immediate right is Senator John Lamping from St. Louis, and to his right, Senator Tim Green, who is from Spanish Lake. I should mention that Senator Green and Representative Lampe are Democrats, and Representative Richardson and Senator Lamping are Republicans. So we have an even split according to the parties on our program this week. Let's start out by talking about the budget, because that's the number one thing the legislature has to deal with every legislative session, and the budget bills start over in the House of Representatives as we meet the halfway point. Are we halfway done with the state budget, Representative Richard?
Well, I think we're getting there. I mean, obviously, the budget is a long process. It takes a long time to get the budget bills not only through their respective subcommittees, but through the Budget Committee. Budget Committee is obviously meeting today and working through those things. So I think that our House Budget Committee is to be commended. They're moving with, I think, due speed, and I think we'll see those bills on the floor as soon as we get back from spring break.
We should mention that this is being recorded ahead of time just before the spring break, so that when he said today, it didn't mean the day you're watching it. But nonetheless, they have been working in the House almost from the first day of the session, in fact, before then. Representative Lampe, how hard is it to draft a budget this year, especially given the fiscal uncertainties the state faces and the budget gap that we started out with?
It's very difficult. The bottom line is there's no money. And so we're moving money around. The governor has given us his budget. As a matter of fact, we're in budget committee all this week here before spring break. We will have all of our bills voted out of committee by the end of the week. So when we return from spring break, we'll be ready to have those on the floor. And it's incredibly difficult, because it's truly about deciding what our priorities are in this moral document that governs our state. And always the decisions are difficult, because well, I will tell you, as an educator, I never think there's enough money in education. So there is a movement right now in the committee to create more money in K-12 education as well as higher ed.
Senator Lamping, this is your second year in the Senate.
That's correct.
Right? And you've been through one budget.
Right.
How daunting is it for someone to come into the legislature and face that first budget? And now you've got a little experience behind you, but you know it's going to be a difficult time when the Senate gets the budget.
Well, in your first year, you're grateful for the fact that you've got experienced legislators that have been through this process before, and you can observe the decisions that they make, and you can learn from that period of time. I think this is an interesting challenge, and I'm so confident in those that on the Senate side. I'm confident in our budget chair and those members that work in that committee. This is the truest budget that all this group will have had to face since the recession began. This is the first budget where it's truly the revenues that come from the state are there to be allocated appropriately. Allocated into Representative Lampe said, kind of our prioritization of what we want to do. And I think it's an interesting challenge that they have to take on. The fact that it's just Missouri money speaks volumes to them having to make those decisions.
Senator Green, you've been on budget committees in the House and the Senate. You've basically spent your entire long legislative career dealing with budgets. How would you compare the situation with this year's budget with some of the other budgets you've seen in the past? Is this a tougher one than usual?
Well, I think the reason it's tough is, like Senator Lamping was saying, we have to come up with $500 or $600 million to supplant the federal money that we used over the last 3 years in increments. So it's always difficult to find the resources to fund, and people have problems cutting certain services. So to balance a budget, you have to live within your means. To live within your means, certain things do not get funded.
You have been a budget chairman when you were in the House. How difficult is it to simply look at people who say, we need help, and say, sorry, we can't afford to give you help?
There's a lot of sleepless nights involved in it. If you have any compassion, it's a very difficult job.
So you folks will get the budget after the House gets done with it. Does the Senate really do that much with the budget once the House has given you the basic document? How much tinkering goes on?
Oh, I think the Senate's
Go ahead, John.
The Senate's budget is a Senate's budget. It's their interpretation of how money should be allocated. I think both bodies are working extremely hard right now, but when it comes over, it's not a done deal by any means. And I think this year more so than years in the past, there's a tremendous amount of discussion, debate to be had with respect to the prioritization of what's in the budget.
Right.
I think one of the things you have to realize before we finish the budget in May is there's several enhancement ideas the governor has brought forth and several legislators. One, how do we fund the nursing homes for the veterans? The governor originally proposed a $1 increase fee on people entering the boats. Now they've come up with a solution they believe dealing with the lottery. Will that be enough to fund what we need to do, as well as the tax amnesty bill? I know that that has had problems in the Missouri Senate. I can't recall if it passed the Missouri House last year, but it's pretty much to give people an opportunity to pay their back taxes. So there's several ways to generate revenues. Let's see if we can deal with them, or we might have to cut more.
Is the House considering any of the ideas the governor has put forth to enhance revenues or plug budget holes?
Well, I think the House is certainly considering some alternatives on how we fund our veterans' homes, and we had two significant pieces of legislation last week. I guess it'll be a couple of weeks by the time this program airs, but they involved finding some additional streams of revenue. One is an additional lottery ticket, although that provision doesn't really raise enough money to fully solve the problem. I think the solution that the House is focused on, and the one that we endorsed last week overwhelmingly, is one that takes some money out of the lottery payback, not the amount of money the state generates, but rather lowering the percentage of payouts on scratch-off tickets, and using that money to fund early childhood, which then allows us to free up all of the money that comes from the casino boats to go to the veterans' homes. We've made a promise to our veterans to make sure that they have adequate care, and I think it ought to be a significant priority for the General Assembly to make sure we have a stable and steady funding stream that funds those homes.
We've also passed out the tax amnesty bill that should help in collections as well. And in our budget deliberations this week, we've just added $12 million to lottery advertising with the hope of increasing the money that will go to veterans' homes.
So you're taking money away from the lottery prize pool.
Right.
Yes.
But you're spending more money on advertising in hopes that
That's
ultimately will replace that in terms of the money
that's-
that goes to education. Is that right?
That's the thinking right now in the budget, yes.
So we still have a long ways to go on these and other issues that have to do with veterans and lottery and education. We've lumped three together here, and we'll probably explore them a little bit more closely when we come back in a minute.
I don't miss my car, and I feel safe when I ride this bus. A little over a year ago, I got my car demolished. So I gave up on driving, and I'm their best customer. I go everywhere on that bus 5 days a week. That's just part of my life now. I enjoy the camaraderie. The drivers are really good drivers, and they look after us. I just feel safe when I ride this bus.
To find out how rural public transportation can put more life in your day, just give us a call.
Mayday, mayday, I need help.
Vessel in distress, this is the United States Coast Guard.
There are many thankless jobs out there. This isn't one of them.
Just before we left on this edition of Capitol Dialogue, it was mentioned that the House had passed a tax amnesty bill, and during the break, Senator Lampe indicated that that bill is probably dead in the state Senate. Tell me, Senator Lampe, why isn't it going to fly on your side?
Well, I think that the thinking is that obviously these are people that didn't pay their taxes, that there are penalties due. By granting them tax amnesty, what you're suggesting is that you're going to give them a discount or a coupon for on the taxes that are ultimately going to be paid. And we know that eventually we'll get these monies. It's just we're not necessarily going to get them in a shortened period of time. So we look at every dollar that goes towards every dollar reduction of penalties to those that haven't paid their taxes. It's a dollar that we ultimately don't get to use.
Senator Green, do you agree with that philosophy?
Well, not really. I do believe in 2002, Governor Holden at that time used tax amnesty to generate some funds, and I think 2005 Governor Blunt did as well. It's an enticement to get people to pay money that you might never see. It's an enticement. Is it the right way to reward people that haven't paid their taxes? Surely not. But right now in drastic times, you need drastic ideas.
Well, there's a related issue. Let me ask you, starting over here on the House side, merchants who collect sales taxes are given a 2% break if they pay their sales tax in on time that they've collected. Why should they get, and includes me because I have a business license when I sell my books, why give me 2% off for doing what I'm supposed to do? And wouldn't that translate into a lot of money if you just said, pay the tax you're supposed to pay?
Well, I mean, certainly it would generate some money. I think we've always had that there as an incentive to pay on time. When you talk about how the state collects money, and one of the reasons I disagree a little bit with Senator Lampe is that there is some value in collecting your money now versus waiting for that money to be collected over time. The present value of that money is worth more than it would be if you extended it out over several payments. So I think that's the same rationale behind the sales tax collection. You know, people can think about this in terms of what our public libraries do from time to time. I know every so often our public libraries will have an amnesty day where you can come and return the books that you borrowed without having to pay the fine. And the reason for that is the libraries know that the only way they may ever get that book back is by extending the amnesty. And I think that the tax amnesty provision is similar. The state certainly faces uncertainty in being able to collect that money. Allowing the amnesty program, and it shouldn't become regular practice, of course, but ensures that we're actually going to collect some of that money that's due.
Sales.
If I might, though, to the extent that it happened in 2002, it happened in 2005, it might happen in 2012, then it becomes regular. And then it becomes a situation where you know you've not paid your taxes on time, you know that maybe you should come forward and pay your taxes on time and pay the fines, but to the extent that amnesty happens over and over and over again, it actually incents you not to make good and to hold off and wait for amnesty to occur once again.
Let's move on to a different topic.
I want to address the question that you asked, though. That's a very old statute before computers were around, when we really had to compute sales tax with paper and pencil, and it's a new time. We really need to look at that and say, does it make sense for us to give a tax break when it was designed to give merchants a tax break because of the time involved in computing that? It's all computed by computers now. It's all determined by computers. And yet small businesses, or all businesses who have sales tax, see that as a cut in their revenue, when in reality it's tax money that should be coming to the state for the things that we believe are important for everyone in Missouri.
Let's move on to another issue that's been a big one in the first half of the legislative session. That's the changes in workers' compensation laws. Sara Lampe, why do we need to make significant changes in workers' comp?
Well, I think to have the system itself remain stable over a longer period of time, I think that's what really necessitates these changes now.
Who benefits the most?
I think it's easy to see where the employers would get the benefit at the beginning, and I think that the employees would benefit over a longer period of time by having a stable program.
Senator Green, you've been an employer person all your career in the legislative session, in the legislature. Are you supporting this workers' comp change?
The way it is right now, no, I do not. One of the things we have to deal with is in 2005 we passed Senate Bill 1, which was a new revamp of the work comp system. In it, after several court cases, we have an issue dealing with the co-employee liability. That's if your co-worker is at fault, they can get sued. So that issue needs to be resolved. What we have done is we have piggybacked an issue dealing with occupational disease on top of that. I think when it comes to occupational disease, a repetitive motion, I being an electrician, continuing to twist wire nuts to make a splice. I have repetitive motion or corporal tunnel in my wrist. That's an occupational disease. But mesothelioma, because there were toxins in the air, that citizen should have the right to civilly go after that employer for that. So that's where I disagree. And of course we have a big issue that nobody seems to want to deal with, not excluding the legislators present, is the second injury fund. It's been in the media for the last 3-4 years. I think we have a group of legislators willing to bring that issue to a close, but special interest tends to throw a dam in that proceedings.
Now, the House has also been working on this a little bit. Where are you? Where's the House?
Well, we have the Senate version of the bill in our chamber now. It passed out of committee last week, and you know, I think the changes are critical, as Senator Green points out, because of the 05 law, to really preserve the workers' comp system the way it has always and historically been. Historically, we've always treated the workers' comp system as the exclusive place to take care of workplace injuries. Because of the way that the 05 law was written, we've kind of gotten away from that. And as Senator Green points out, two major issues there. So I support putting both of those issues to bed by making sure that employees can get appropriate compensation through the work comp system. The second injury fund is an absolutely critical issue for the state right now. The state second injury fund is insolvent. It's bankrupt. We cannot pay the existing obligations of the fund with the current revenue we have. So if we don't deal with that, we're going to be facing continued federal court lawsuits, and at some point a federal court's going to enter an order that either orders us to pay it out of general revenue or really upends the entirety of the work comp system. So I think it's incumbent upon this legislature to find a solution to that. We're working through it. We attempted to work through it last year and couldn't come to a compromise. But if we don't get it done this year, I think the consequences are going to be serious, not only for employees who are seeking access to the system, but also for employers.
Well, Representative Lampe, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds here.
No, I have nothing to add. I'm clearly where Senator Green is.
Great. Let's come back and talk some more about some of the other major issues facing the legislature as they head into the second half of the session in a minute.
Has anyone ever said, you're the picture of health? You look healthy and you feel fine. But that may not be the full picture. Colorectal cancer is the #2 cancer killer. It doesn't always cause symptoms, but it can be prevented. Get screened. Make sure you are the picture of health.
To learn about screening in St. Louis, call 314-879-6392. That's 314-879-6392.
All across Missouri, people are making a difference. AmeriCorps, providing resources to meet human needs. Vista, building better communities. Learn and Serve, promoting the service of youth. Senior Corps, sharing wisdom and experience. Make a difference, be a volunteer. This message brought to you by the Missouri Community Service Commission. For more information, visit movolunteers.org or call 877-210-7611.
We're halfway through this legislative session, and we have 4 members of the General Assembly with us to kind of grade things. So far, the grade is incomplete, which is not unusual for halfway through a legislative session. A lot of work goes on in the first, well, basically the first 15 weeks, and then a lot more work goes on in the last 3 or 4 weeks that finishes things up. So let's talk about one of the other major issues, and that would be education, because education is, after you pay the debt, education is the #2 issue that the Constitution says you have to approach. We have 2 issues with education this year, elementary and secondary, and then funding cuts the governor's recommended for higher education. So what has the House done, first of all, with the governor's cuts to higher education?
Well, I think we're looking for ways to restore them. The governor proposed a 12.5% cut in higher education, which will have a devastating impact on a number of our institutions. I look at the institution in my home district, Three Rivers. A 12.5% cut represents a $500,000 in real money. They'd be looking at a 20% tuition increase just to make up that difference. When you're talking about schools that are supposed to be there to provide access to higher education, that kind of cut limits access, particularly in a district that isn't very wealthy. So I think the House is going to do what we can to try to make higher education a priority and to find a way to restore some of those cuts.
Now, Representative Lampe, this is a special interest of yours. Are you focusing on higher education or elementary and secondary?
Yes, both.
Okay.
But I will tell you that the House substitute that will come to the floor will restore higher education funding almost completely. If not, it will be only a 1 or 2% cut, which is just Christmas Day for a lot of colleges.
Well, elementary and secondary education has struggled now for about 4 years.
Never adequate funding.
For the legislature to even meet its own goals for fully funding the formula. How far are we behind now?
We're about $250 million behind.
In state aid to public education.
Yes. And there is discussion about a rework of the formula that is a part of a legislative education bill to create more equity throughout the distribution. And I'm guessing that that is not going to fly either because it's part of a larger bill that likely will die.
Your school districts, are they telling you that they're really hurting because of state aid lagging behind?
Well, no, actually, the vast majority of the school districts in St. Louis County and all the school districts I represent are hold harmless districts, and which means they principally self-fund. So the K through 12, this is actually going to be a record year for K through 12 funding. It is a few $100 million below what the funding formula had called for, but to think that you're actually going to fund over $3 billion to K through 12 in a year where you're going to collect $7.4 billion, that's higher than it was 3 years ago when collections were over $8 billion. So the state has certainly kept its commitment. My districts, though, receive so very little money from the state that what goes on with respect to the funding allocations doesn't have a dramatic impact on my schools.
Senator Green, how about you? Are you in the same situation he's in?
Well, my school districts probably receive 35 to 40% of their funding from the state, 60 to 65% from local property taxes. So it's the same as Senator Lampe. Both rely heavily on local property taxes. The one thing we have to always look at, though, when we're talking about education and higher education as well, is somebody's got to make the cuts for the budget to be balanced. Okay, we have all started at the beginning of the show saying we're going to be $500 to $600 million short of revenues due to we're not using the federal dollars this year. You have to cut somewhere. Education, whether it's higher or elementary, secondary, is driven by general revenue dollars. That's your sales tax dollars and your income tax dollars. We have cut as far as we can in corrections. We have cut mental health as far as we can. So where else can you make some of these cuts? And once again, drastic times, you have drastic decisions that have to be made. I'm sure the governor was not excited about cutting higher education, but when we do fully fund or give higher ed these monies, where's the cuts going to come from then? Are they going to come from parents as teachers? Are they going to come from seniors in nursing homes for the reimbursement there? Where do you cut? It's a very difficult decision-making process.
That's a great point, because I mean, with the cuts to higher ed were real, but they were $30 or $40 million. There was actually an increase to K through 12, so the total cut in education is somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 or $30 million when we're going to cut $500 million in total. So I think we've done a good job, the state's done a good job of, I mean, its number one priority is education, and it speaks volumes to the fact that it's not really cutting education except for, you know, the portion of the higher ed. It's unfortunate, though, the rest of these cuts will come from everything else the government does.
These two folks are from the St. Louis area. You're from outstate, from a small town, right. Relatively small town.
Right.
Your picture probably is completely different, though, with your schools, aren't they?
Well, it is a completely different picture, and you know the funding formula for K through 12 education is very complicated, and it affects districts in very different ways. In the area that I represent, depending on the options that are on the table right now in terms of reforming the funding formula, it can have dramatic differences in terms of how it impacts my school district. So obviously, I think we need to try to bring some simplicity to the funding formula and put it on a path where it's stable going forward. We are in the position we're in because, as you noted, the legislature hasn't funded, and that's not a fault of the legislature, it's just we haven't had the money. But we need to do something to fix the funding formula, and I'm hopeful that the legislature will be able to pass something this year.
What do you think are the odds of getting it done?
The funding formula switch, 0.
Why?
Because it's a part of a larger education bill that we believe is dead.
Okay, let's move on to another topic then. The other topic is employment discrimination. The Senate has spent a lot of time, including most of one night, on employment discrimination. What's the problem here that you're trying to cure?
Well, sure. What we're trying to do is we're trying to create a platform for employers that they feel encouraged to continue to be here, for other employers to come here, for our existing employers to expand. When we think of that platform, we think of tax policy, we think of economic policy, and we think of the courts themselves. Are our courts business-friendly, or are they anti-business? And in this very specific area of employment at will law, specific to discrimination, The Missouri courts have consistently over the last 4 or 5 years moved away from federal standards. This is not legislative changes. It's decisions that were made in state courts such that all of these employment cases now are exclusively tried in state courts. And so the business community has asked us to do is to take the direction that states courts have taken this law and move it back to the federal standards. That's what we passed out of the Senate last year, passed out of the Senate this year. It was obviously vetoed last year, likely to be vetoed again this year. We had a lot of people discuss, well, what does this have to do with employment? Well, there's certain things that make up a positive platform, and one of them is to have a business-friendly court system.
Senator Green, you were not too wild about this bill.
Well, the state of Missouri has been and always will be an employment at will state. What that basically means is you can be dismissed from your job and the employer does not have give reason. That's employment at will. What we're dealing with this whistleblower doctrine is a court case that a local St. Louis County Circuit Court made a decision on under the current state statutes that an employee was wrongfully discharged because he brought forth something that might be done improper with the company. So we have had business trying to change that court decision over the last 10 years. We passed this bill last year. It was vetoed by the governor, and the Republican legislature has decided, let's do this again. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Here we spent a month of January. It's going to go to the governor, and as Senator Lampe said, it'll probably get vetoed. Wow, what have we really done for the people today?
But this time, if it's sent to the governor soon enough by the House and the Senate, it can come back for a veto override before the session ends.
That's right.
Can it be overridden in the House?
No.
I don't think it can be overridden in the House as currently written, but I think having the governor act on this bill while we're in session gives the legislature the opportunity to come back and look at some things that perhaps we can compromise on this bill. Senator Lampe points out, I mean, our employment discrimination laws in Missouri have gotten way out of line with where they were intended to be and way out of line with where the federal standard is. So I think as we move forward with the session, we'll be looking for ways that we can find some agreement with the governor and get something passed that gives us a stable platform.
So we have a lot of issues that we've already been working on for the first half of the legislative session. We have some disagreements, obviously, about various things philosophically and practically. These are things that are worked out in the last 2 weeks of the legislative session, we hope. We'll see what happens, and we'll be back next month to update you on what's going on. Thanks for being with us.